I'm Jen Valenga, and this is the Ditch Your Backup Plan podcast. Stories of rewarding careers between starving artist and celebrity to give you the inspiration to follow a risky career path.
What I found really interesting for me is that I actually feel like I have to be the person that I hope others will see. At this time, there's no disabled representation on Broadway in stage management. I'm not on stage. I hope that there's a future where there is a Broadway stage manager with cerebral palsy and other disabilities.
Today's episode features Peter Royston. He's an equity stage manager based in New York and originally from the Bay Area. His credits include Blue Man Group, the Public Theater, the Lark, Oregon Shakespeare Festival, San Jose Rep, Theater Works, among many others. Since 2017, Peter has become a vocal advocate and ally to the disabled community, specifically through his lived experience as a white gay man with cerebral palsy. Peter hopes to see disabled stage management representation on Broadway and increased visibility of disabled artists across all aspects of the industry. I learned so much from Peter. I hope you learned something too with episode 51 and Peter Royston. Today I'm interviewing Peter Royston. He's an equity stage manager based in New York City. How are you doing today, Peter?
I'm lovely. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. We just celebrated the anniversary of the CDC, or the World Health Organization, declaring a pandemic. I got my shot on the very day, the anniversary. So that feels like we're kind of moving out of the woods. What do you think?
Yes, I think so. It's the anniversary of Broadway shutting down today. And I feel like a weight is being lifted and we're finally moving towards some actionable steps to help us move forward.
So you're calling from New York City and you are an equity stage manager, which means you've probably been out of work for a while, or at least in terms of theater.
Yep, that would be accurate.
What were you doing before the shutdown?
Yes. So the week of the shutdown, I was finishing training to do front of house at Blue Man in addition to being a stage manager. And I was talking to one of the other stage managers about my schedule because I was more than likely going to be a house manager in April for Playwrights Realm. That was what was happening on this Thursday last year. And I was actually sitting in my temp job at Blue School as a receptionist. And I was looking forward to seeing a show, The Minutes. And as I was doing my shift, I heard on the news in all different directions. And I was just told to go home. And so, I took my last subway ride and stayed home for 2 weeks.
Any news about anything opening up anytime soon for you?
Well, Blue Man Group was originally going to be like most of the shows in New York and open again in April, and then it got pushed back to June. And now we are all permanently furloughed. And so there's no information really about the future of Blue Man. Blue Man Group is a staple here in New York. It's been here for 30 years, but what that means for the future, we have no answers yet.
Mm-hmm. You said your temp job. So when you're, working as a stage manager is a freelance job. So what have you done to supplement your income, and are you still doing that?
During my time at Blue Man Group, I worked also in actually did some other stage management work. So I would go across the street and I worked on the New Works program, which is called Emerging Writers Group. That was all through. And so I got to continue that because those were in week-long kind of situations. And there were 10 writers throughout the year. So I would do that as well. And I worked kind of a concierge job for Hudson Yards, which is a new area that opened up here. 1 month, I did the rehearsals for a show that went to the Alley Theater called Camp David. And so I actually supplemented Blue Man Group with other stage management work in addition to other non-theater jobs.
So you were really busy. Then you had probably quite a change to go from being that busy to everything. That's all hospitality. That's all entertainment and hospitality. So then it's all shut down.
Yeah, I really enjoyed being a part of Blue Man Group, and there was like pros and cons to it all, like having a regular stage management job that this is what you're doing. If I was the full-time stage manager of Blue Man Group doing 6 shows a week, that would be wonderful in some respects. but also being a part-time stage manager, I was able to do lots of other things too. And being active and a theater person, it was just the joy that it brings and I get to be a part of. So I loved it.
Did you go to school for stage management?
I actually found stage management in college. So I went to Sonoma State in California. It was a small program, and there was the second year I was advised to take the stage management class. There was a choice between a going to see theater class or this class, and I go see theater anytime I have a chance. So that's not like a special thing for me. And I was advised to take it. And the course, part of the course is you go through all the steps and you have your book and then you do a show. And so the show started off and I was like, I hate this. But by the end of it, I loved all the parts of it. I realized I loved the relationship I had with the director. I loved the relationship I had with the actors, with the crew, and seeing all the pieces come together and knowing about everything at all times. It's something that as a stage manager, I love to see all the pieces and know why all these things are happening. And so I love those systems. And the following year, I got my choice of shows. So I was assistant stage manager first, and then I was a stage manager on Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which fulfilled my love of Tennessee Williams, and then I was the production stage manager for a theater festival my final year, and I oversaw 4 other stage managers.
Oh, wow. When you had that initial response of I hate this, what part of it did you not like?
Yeah, well, so before that time, I was working to be a performer. And so that was it was an adjustment because I was like, oh, I'm taking this off, or, oh, I have to deal with these things. But then I was like, oh, but I get to deal with these things. And it's like, for me, it was just a shift. Like you had to go through that. And it's probably a general lesson, which I thought was really valuable, that the technical director and production manager said at the time to all of us is like, do not judge what you're doing or don't decide about it until you're done with it. And he said that during it, and I was like, okay, I have to do. And by the end of it, it's like, yes, yeah.
I feel like I've been doing it long enough now that I know that there's always going to be a moment that comes where I'm like, this show is terrible. I don't know why. What were we thinking? This is awful. And then it almost comes like clockwork now, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in that phase. And then eventually you get over it.
Mm-hmm. There's usually like several things that happen in the show, and it's like somebody's probably going to lose their temper, or there's going to be a blow up, there's going to be a disagreement, there's going to be like a complete high, there's going to be a definitely like roadblock that you hit, and there's certain things that you should probably go into. You don't know how they're going to manifest, but there's like certain things that will more than likely happen on a show. So once you kind of learn that, you go with the flow, and it's part of the journey. It's like, that's how the work is created. There is all this passion and energy around the show, and there are these markers. And so once you learn that's part of the work, and it's how we develop these beautiful pieces of art and how we work together, you just buckle up.
Do you think that it takes a certain kind of temperament to be a stage manager?
Yes, I find that really, interesting, like, because there's a lot of what we call styles of stage management, and I've found that really fascinating to see how certain directors like certain stage managers, or certain actors like certain stage managers, or designers like certain stage managers, and which sort of stage managers work well with certain people, or which people are considered difficult to work with.
How do you characterize your temperament within stage management?
I think what fascinates me, where the part of stage management that I love the most, is the psychology aspect. And so working with people and seeing what is the motivation for why they're getting things done, or what they want, or what they need, is something that is really fascinating to me. And it's sort of like, what is the cause and effect of this action? And I think that's what we're constantly looking at when we're watching a play, we're reading a play, and when we're also working with each other. It's how do you motivate people, or what is it? How do you help lift up people so that they get what they want, so that they can do their job effectively, and in turn, you can do yours.
Which, now that you say that, lifting other people up, you said you are known as the kindness ambassador, and I want to know more about that. When did that moniker happen? And tell me a little bit about being the kindness ambassador.
Yeah. I feel like it's a way of life or something that I've chosen, and that I try to approach everything with kindness and understanding and empathy. And a lot of thinking recently, especially, is like, why do I have such a high empathy gauge or monitor, and why is that something like I have to see the world through that? And I think that's related to is like that you look at people with kindness. There's always everybody on this. Everybody's trying their best, and if you can see that, then it also gives you humility in the situation, and to also understand and send people off and understand the situation with love and care. And I think that there's a lot of space in the world where that's not happening, where people forget about it. And I see that walking around the city in New York, and I see that in situations at work where you think that everybody is looking at each other with loving eyes and kindness, and sometimes I think that does not happen, and it causes a lot of problems that may not need to occur.
It really does demonstrate your emotional intelligence, which I think is a beautiful thing. And we all need that right now. We need the kindness and empathy as we've been going through this crazy year.
Yeah. And there's a lot of like systems in place where we have to get things done, and we have to do our production calendar in a certain way and do this. And that if you're always rushing or trying to make sure that you get things done as fast as you can, or that we have to do it at this time, and you don't take the moment to check in with your people and to actually see if these systems or this way of working is helping, it actually can continue, I think, to deteriorate our situations and the joy that we should all feel every time we walk into a theater. I would believe that every time we walk into a theater, we should feel joy and humility and excitement for being with our people.
Yeah. Oh, can you imagine what it's going to be like to be back with our people again?
I've been feeling homesick recently. I just saw a webinar with Theater Art Life, and it was with Anna Robb and her automation person that she worked with a lot. And I just hearing them speak and just like feeling like I was in the room, like a production office, hearing them talk about the cues and everything. I started to get teary eyed, and I just said, I'm homesick. I'm homesick.
Oh, that's amazing. You're going to get back to it so soon. I know you are. You grew up in California, is that right?
Yeah, I was born in San Francisco, and then I stayed there through college, and moved to New York in 2014.
Did you go for acting?
Yeah, I was primarily a performer, but I also was at a time in college, and I considered psychology. What I decided with stage management was that was the psychology that I learned would be used as a stage manager. I loved being able to work with people and to have those conversations. But I also thought of something during that time too, was just being like a psychologist for the actors, because I loved seeing what actors go through. And I loved watching actors backstage, and especially in some of my first experiences, like having somebody talk about their day, and we would just be chatting, and that was what we needed. And then they drop their pants and walk on stage. And then somebody else needed to be left alone, and you do not talk to them. And they get on stage and they're stabbing their children. One actor was on stage for 3 hours that I worked with, delivering this epic performance. And she asked for me to throw a blanket over her at the end of the show, just before she did a bow. And it's like, you might think that's just like a trivial matter. And some people might say, like, why does she need that? She's difficult. But for me, I found that really fascinating. It's just like, what can you do to help that performance? And if it's for a real purpose, and if it helps that person, that actor or that performer deliver an exceptional performance, why not give it to them?
Yeah, that's really interesting. There are, when you're playing in the soul of human beings, there are certain things that have to happen in order for them to access that deep part of themselves. And you get to be a part of that.
It's still like, I guess, going back and looking at people's relationships, like how certain people view other people and label people like difficult or troublesome. And there's a lot of people that I've worked with, or creative people that I've worked with, and I would not consider them difficult. other people, I would think. So I just find that really interesting and talking about personality dynamics and what works well. If you've been working a long time, we all have gifts, and there are certain teams that work really well. And there's certain people that, yes, you can work well, but maybe it would be better if you figure out a different dynamic. And I think that's just something that constantly I'm thinking about and looking at and watching and seeing. And I find it really interesting just to see all of the psychology play out off stage and on stage.
Yeah, and how you really define difficulty and personality difficulties and challenges, and how you define that. That's cool. Did you intend to make your profession in the arts when you went off to college? And did you have a backup plan?
I knew that I was going to do whatever I could to make it work. I had several challenges throughout my life. I grew up in a family that should have had many resources to offer. And I had a plan set up with a mentor in high school, actually, of how I would build a career and have multiple streams of income in different ways that I could make a living in the arts. And we set up a plan, and I brought in my family, and they agreed to it. And but by my final semester, I was threatened with an ultimatum, and I actually had to finish out my final semester on my own. And I rushed and found some grants, and my school helped me. And I went on. And because of my work and my references in college, I was able to start working as a non-equity assistant at some of the regional theaters pretty much off the bat. But that final semester, I started working at Banana Republic, and I worked there for a few years. And then I worked at Pete's Coffee and Tea. I was a coffee and tea specialist for 5 years. And then I got to a place where I was an equity stage manager, and I dropped that. So I think, like, for me, I just decided that I was going to be in theater and that I knew what I needed to do. And so whatever I needed to do to support that and make that happen was what I needed to do.
I don't want to get into anything too personal if you don't want to share it. So
yeah.
But you had a plan sort of approved, and then sort of the rug pulled out from under you. That must have been surprising, but you kept going. Do you want to share any more about
definitely,
that? Yeah, educating students who maybe are in similar situations.
Yeah. I definitely, from the psychology standpoint, I see now too, as an older person, and some of my other colleagues and even disabled colleagues, or I see the people that are really successful, and I can almost tell like who had family that was supportive and loving and who wasn't. And usually in interviews, they say it, or when you get up and you deliver your Tony speech and you say, I couldn't have done this without my mom. And I won't be able to say that. So there's a lot that went into my childhood that I'm actually, because of pandemic, I realized that there were things that I was still holding on to. And part of the gift of this pandemic is that I've had lots of time to see connections and to realize that I need to confront certain issues. And so I think that is really important. And that if you are somebody who has had any kind of challenges and not a supportive upbringing, please seek out the help and find your people. I've been gifted with some incredible people in my life who are my chosen family, and that's what's gotten me through. I found the people that understood what I went through, and that's what's kept me going forward.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, Peter. That's so important. We say all the time that family is second only behind your health. And family is how you define it. It has to be your people that you define, because it's not always biological. And that happens a lot. I think there's a lot of people who find theater through the home that it provides, when maybe family doesn't always provide what you think that they're going to. I don't know how else to say that, but
it's a place where you can see, just the work that's there. Like, all those plays speak to me. And as like Glass Menagerie is my favorite play, and there's a reason why. So
yeah. When was the first time you saw it or read it?
So the first time I read it was in college. But I became obsessed, as I usually do. Something sparks me and I get obsessed with it. So I started reading Tennessee's biography. I saw the parallels between us. And I saw that the director who was doing Cat on a Tin Roof, who was my mentor, had done a production of Glass Menagerie before. So we talked about it a lot. And I've seen that many productions. I saw 3, I think, in the Bay Area. I've seen both productions most recently on Broadway. And I've seen I think there's 3 recordings of different productions of it on, and I love the variances of the Amandas and if anybody on the podcast knows the Amandas and the Rose variations and the Tom. And I also found it fascinating watching some of the recordings where they had cut out Tom's monologue at the beginning, which really pissed me off. Or really bothered me.
It's actually Laura, isn't it? Not Rose, but
oh
Rose
my gosh,
is
should I
his
do
real
it again?
sister.
I do that all the time.
You did. No, but I mean that's telling. You made Laura Rose, which is actually his real sister. I directed it in 2016. Tennessee Williams is not my first to go to if I choose to direct something. And when I was handed that play to direct, it was time to do a Williams, and I was like, okay, I'll do this with a small cast. I had to find a way in, and I ended up really loving that production. And then the Broadway production came out, which was also very abstracted, and I was like, I'm doing an abstracted one, which we did. I didn't do it because of them, but we were doing it simultaneously in an abstracted way, which is pretty cool to feel that in the ether that it was ready to be done that way.
Yeah.
I'll probably cut all of this out because no one cares about my directing. But I did cast an African-American Laura, which was interesting. And we had a whole long conversation about whether or not we were going to have the picture of the father be white or black, because Amanda was white. And in the end, I let the actress playing Laura decide. And she said black father, which puts an interesting dynamic on that relationship and that family.
I didn't think about making a statement like that.
Yeah.
I was still really fascinated too, hearing the differences in conversation and the reviews between the 2 productions. And of course, they were both really important. But the most recent one got a lot of really, for me, it was not great reviews.
Yeah.
And it was very telling about how we view disability and why we make the choices we do. And I think that production should have been given different reviewers, or at least some reviewers that were disabled, or some more varying opinions. And I saw it, and I was actually taken aback, where I could just feel the energy from the audience. And it was unpleasant and it was unfair. And I felt like I overheard conversations. I was like, I want to just say something to you, because people were judging it while they were watching it too. They didn't even give space to see how impactful it was to see an actor crawl up the stairs onto stage and to deliver a beautiful performance. It was different than what they may have seen before, but it was really important. And to see a disabled lived experience told on stage like that was so impactful and beautiful for me.
And probably not something you see very often.
No.
Do you think we're making strides in the theater community to be more inclusive for disabled artists?
I think people are trying, but I think it's much deeper and complicated than the strides or the small representation that we've had. And I think it goes to a lot of the systems and and our culture and how we view who is best to do a job, and how we give time to let everybody do their job most effectively and do what they do best. I think people are ready to deal with it and confront it, but it will take like active discipline and awareness and actual time to consider all the different aspects of ableism in the workplace and in our world.
Do you think you've faced discrimination in your career?
Yeah, I think there's confusion and fear around the ADA. And
yeah.
So
for anyone who doesn't know, that's the American with Disabilities Act. Americans with Disabilities Act?
I think it's actually something that needs to be discussed more, is what the ADA says. And I think it's actually a policy thing that needs to be discussed in the language and what language we can use to ask about disability and to talk about it.
What are some of the wrong and right ways to use vocabulary around disability?
I think disability is an important word to use to talk about disability. And it's been a journey that I've been on. When I first wrote my first public article in HowlRound, I used hashtag handicapable. And I've since been on a journey to accept the term disability and to own that I'm a disabled human and to find strength in that. But I am also aware that I am myself and that there are other people that may still use other terms, and you should never tell someone that they need to be labeled anything specific. But especially around the years since 2017, it is very important as kind of a general consensus to use disabled as the term. Other terms are kind of looked at as a erasure of the disabled experience. We are disabled people, and there's no fear in talking about disability. I was at a job interview, and I got up to shake my interviewer's hand, and I immediately saw that the interviewer clocked my hand. And we went about the interview, and it was a good interview.
Clocked your hand?
Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you. So what I mean by clocked is somebody basically looks down and sees my hand and the questioning, like, what's going on here.
So, like, got it. Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of references, I feel like, for me that get used around race and even transgender humans that I feel like relates to how I feel like disability for me gets clocked, because I have able-bodied passing privilege most of the time. I have a weakness on my right side. So when I get really tired, you'll see me limp. If I'm trying to exercise, you'll see that my right leg might start to go in, and I need to work on that. So if I exercise, it gets less and less visible. And I have a lot of tightening in my right arm. So usually that's the hand that people go to shake. And that's usually one of the dead gives away that people are like, what's going on there? And if I haven't exercised, or if I'm nervous about something, it might get tighter. If I'm in quarantine and I haven't gotten to exercise very much, it's tighter right now. So when someone shakes them, they're like, what's going on there? And there's been so many different responses. Someone thought that I didn't want to shake their hands and I was being aloof. Some people are like, oh, what's wrong with him? Like, does he have some other issue? It's just immediately a thing. And so part of the time I respond and I like to give hugs. And so I usually will, and I feel like I can sense a lot about somebody from a hug, and that takes it away. But also there are different ways to shake a hand. I consider doing a left-handed. I've had thoughts about doing that sometime, but that's not usually what it goes to, and just be like, okay, I'll do, here's my left hand.
Yeah.
So what happened was we had a good interview, and the interviewer asked for my references, and I got a glowing reference from one of my people, and then they got a response, my reference, that was still asking, is there anything wrong with Peter that we should know about? Are you sure? And I'm paraphrasing that language. And so it's bothered me a lot, because I don't know why someone can't, if you had a concern, why you wouldn't ask in the interview. And as a stage manager, and some people had asked before, they just would be like, we have a lot of heavy things. Is there any assistance you need? And I usually, before that time, would just say, yes, I can do most things. I might need a little bit of help if there's something heavy, but I can move furniture. I can move props, and it's not an issue between stage management. And it usually didn't come up, really. I was able to do most things. I've always typed one-handed, so that's just what I do. And it wasn't something that I talked about. Part of my awakening and discussion and thinking about all of this has been since 2017, and actively speaking up and saying, I do have cerebral palsy. This is what happens to me when I'm tired, and to just be upfront about it. But I've also run into awareness and learning about the actual laws, and like you can't ask people if they have a disability if they're not going to share it.
But you can volunteer it, and you probably want that volunteered sometimes.
And it's a lot of the language. So like a lot of the questions and what I've been trying to model and trying to spread this is that we usually have what folks do usually in a rehearsal process. You give your meet and greet at the beginning of the production's calendar, and the stage manager a lot of the times will start it. So, hi, I'm Peter Royston. My preferred pronouns are he, him, his. I'm your stage manager. I'm a white man with short brown hair. I have glasses. I have cerebral palsy, which manifests for my access needs is that I have limited mobility in my right and left side, so I will be typing one-handed. I may take different steps to do cues or to engage with you, but that will show up. And I have aphasia, so when I get tired or am overwhelmed sometimes, my speech will get slurred, and also there will probably be errors in emails or other written form when I have aphasia. So if there are a few errors, that's what that is.
And then you just say it out loud right there at the beginning, and then that opens it up for everyone else to be able to share something that can help access. And then opening it up and just please go around and introduce yourselves. And if you have any access needs you would like to share with the group, please do. And if you would rather have a private conversation with me after, please come to me and we'll talk about it. And it's also an open thing that your access needs might change. As the production goes on, people's access needs change. Also, you do not have to be disabled to have access needs. So this is something that benefits everybody if we start to actually engage and see what are things that help people. Gosh, Peter, you really educated me because I hadn't thought about how empowering that is to have the person in charge, the stage manager, say, model that. It's been a shift for me. So I came out, I had my disability awareness or outing process happen in 2017. And when I saw a Cost of Living with Greg Mungzala and Katie Sullivan, and it wasn't just the play, it was an article that I saw them both read and talk about disability, and that the disability revolution is now. And hearing them both talk about disability and the language we use around it, and something clicked in my brain while I was riding on the bus. I was like, what are you doing, Peter? And I have been forever changed. I saw it again. I have been fortunate enough to work on a show at the Lark that was produced by the Apothecary and start having these conversations around stage management and disability. And then also looking to see that there really wasn't anybody talking about disability and stage management, at least in a real deep way. That's why I need to be here. But I feel, at the same time, I feel alone and unsure because a lot of the conversations are about me just talking about my experiences and my thoughts. And there's not a large community that is able to openly speak and talk about disability. You're a pioneer. It's lonely to be a pioneer. Oh. I hope that more people start to feel comfortable and to realize that their voices matter, and that there's other experiences that are like mine and different. And I think that they're important because I think our stories and our experiences are the thing that's lacking in moving the conversation and moving theater into the more equitable space that we all dream and talk about that we want. Thank you for doing that work, because I think it's important work, and it's, I think, hard to take on, and somebody has to. I mean, you know, when you're in the minority or you're an underrepresented voice, you're called upon to do the heavy lifting of the educational piece for everybody else. But there's certain souls who are hardwired for that, and I feel like you are. Mm-hmm. Well, have you had any big risks? I mean, I think given your situation, it's all a big risk. So this is a ridiculous question, but what? Well, like one thing with me is that there's a point where I'm like, I have to do this. And so I do it. But once I've decided I'm going to do it, that means I have to do it. Like, although my family may have decided that our plan didn't matter, I had decided I was going to do it.
So I had to do it. So, but along those stages in this journey, and even to where I am now, there's a risk in everything I've done.
When you take those big risks, which, happen pretty regularly, what do you see as some of the big rewards from taking risk?
I see the world shift. I see that things open up. I see brightness and a future of possibilities.
Yeah. I always ask, have you made it?
I really feel like I relate a lot to Brené Brown, and I found a lot of like solace in listening to her speak, because she says a lot of people, like, she had friends be like, when are you going to feel satisfied? And I'm not sure when that happens. I think that's part of the gift of theater too. Like, we definitely have things that we need to achieve. And I have a vision of how theater looks in an equitable standpoint. And I'm not going to rest until that happens. But there will always be another way that we can look at a situation and do better. There will always be another way that we could do a scene shift better. There's another way that we could have had our production meeting, had that conversation better, and it would have been smoother. And there's always room and area to look at what has happened and what could happen in a deeper and more profound level. And so I think that I definitely want to keep achieving my dreams and what that is. But I hope it just continues on, and I hope I can continue to pass the torch to whoever else needs a little light.
Yeah, it's kind of a ridiculous question, but it's what people ask. People ask you, well, have you made it? And other people define that for us instead of ourselves. But I love your answer.
And it's interesting too, like what people consider your break. I don't know. I don't really know. And in terms of like the Peter that was in his room listening to like Les Mis when he was 9, like, and seeing the vision, like, in some respects I've accomplished the goals that I had set. But yet I feel like I still am working towards achieving my goals and my bigger dreams.
Mm-hmm. Because if you stop trying to achieve them, then what?
And I love that idea too of like what Michelle Obama says too about we're always becoming our next best self, or that sentiment.
Yeah, cool. I think you have to see it to be it. Is there anybody you were able to see that you knew that you could be who you are?
I mean, definitely seeing like Greg Monzola and Katie Sullivan was a big, like, it was the time. It was a thing where I finally saw myself reflected somehow, and maybe that was because I was ready to receive that and have that awakening. But that was to see it and then to realize, oh, how does this relate to me? And then, so I feel like that was a seat to be it. What I found really interesting for me is that I actually feel like I have to be the person that I hope others will see. At this time, there's no disabled representation on Broadway in stage management. I'm not on stage. And so I hope that there's a future where there is a Broadway stage manager with cerebral palsy and other disabilities.
I hope it's you, Peter. I hope you get to be the first.
I feel like Elphaba. It's my defying gravity moment right now.
Yes. We have to get Broadway open first, don't we?
Yep. And it's also just that story that you want to tell. I want to work on productions and with people that are actively pursuing an equitable space. I want to work in those spaces. So I also do not want to return to Broadway. I don't want to work on shows or productions where people are not actively investigating this and actually taking actionable steps to make a more beautiful, humble industry and environment. And New York is going to be an interesting challenge because there's the buildings and the systems that are in place to actually make it accessible for people who are disabled to get around. And like our subway system is very ableist. There's stories from colleagues that I've had where they had to be hoisted out of a subway location because the station ahead was shut down, and that was the one that had an elevator. And I feel lots of hope that there's I forget his specific title, but there's a transit ambassador for New York that's going to be hopefully streamlining a lot of the improvements with the subway system. But it's very difficult and to get around, and there's a lot of theater spaces that are not wheelchair accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not as accessible as they should be for even people that don't have severe physical limitations. And speaking to that, like I was able to adjust certain things in the booth at Blue Man Group that's been there for 30 years. That we're in this small little space, and right next to it is all the electrics, and there's this big open space, and there is a lot of equipment that needs to be done, but there was a way that I think it could have been built where it was more accessible or more comforting to all the stage management. Before 2017, I would just try to be as creative and not even talk to anybody about it. But at Blue Man Group, I was really fortunate to talk about my access needs at my first interview, and we addressed the issues. And I call Blue Man Group differently than anybody else does. I wear an eye patch over one of my eyes during one of the flash scenes. I use a stool to do cue lights so that I can access them. And I use my phone to do my notes instead of the tablet because it's easier for my hand and access needs. And I have my own style, and that's how it was adopted.
It sounds like Blue Man Group was very accommodating for you.
Yeah. I mean, it was a joyful experience, and I really do hope that Blue Man comes back.
Yeah. Cool. I would expect that from them, from what I know.
It was definitely a room in a space where we always went in with joy and came out with joy.
Mm-hmm. Peter, do you have any recommendations for anything you think listeners should read to educate themselves more, or just, for fun that you're listening to, watching, reading right now?
The Disability Visibility Project podcast is really good. There's a variety of voices from all different creative aspects of our career. There's a really interesting one that I heard about video games. There's a lot of new books that are coming out this year. There's a new person in Australia who's also talking about disability, but from like how it is in Australia. And I think if you also go to the Crip Camp social media, they're uplifting a lot of those voices and reminding us about them. And I think it's wonderful to see all the different variances and similarities of disability, because there's so much variety in disability itself, and then also even in all the different facets of disability. There's so much variety in cerebral palsy, and there's so much variety in autism, and in all the lived experience.
And then, of course, all of the intersectionality of that as well.
Yeah. It's something that I've reflected on with being a disabled person recently, is that I think inherently makes you have to have empathy and I to seek out the humanity and variety of life, because there's so much, we have to find the differences and similarity. There's a lot of crossover between the different lived experiences. There's a lot of differences and similarities.
That's great. If listeners want to follow you on Instagram or LinkedIn or anywhere that you are posting information, I know you have a blog. Where do you want them to follow you?
I mean, if you're ready to take the plunge into LinkedIn, you're welcome to do that. If you want to have a conversation, or on Instagram, please follow me or message me and see. And I'd love to connect with other disabled stage managers of all varieties.
Cool. Peter, thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I just knew we would hit it off because I've been watching what you post, and I'm like, I love him. I'm so glad we connected, truly.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I hope I connect with some other folks, and I hope we continue to spread the love and see the light as we move on into the year.
You've been listening to the Ditch Your Backup Plan podcast. I'm Jen Valenga. Episode 51 is the last one for a little while. I'm taking a hiatus to work on some professional development, so it's a great time for you to go back to the beginning and get your inspiration all over again. Here's hoping all the theaters open up so soon. Thanks for listening.